Hello everyone, I am the Midnight Storyteller. I know you clicked on this video to relax for a while or perhaps to let my voice help you fall asleep. Before you do, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you now? And what time is it? Alright, find a comfortable position and relax. I never paid much attention to mirrors before all this began. They were simply functional objects, tools for shaving, fixing my hair, checking if food was stuck between my teeth. Nothing more than reflective surfaces showing exactly what stood before them, with perfect synchronization and predictable behavior. That changed 3 weeks after I moved into the Victorian apartment building on Harrow Street. The apartment itself was a steel spacious, high ceilings, original hardwood floors, and walking distance to my new job at the university library. The previous tenant had left abruptly, breaking their lease without explanation, which explained the reduced rent. The landlord, an elderly man named Mr. Finch, seemed almost too eager to have someone occupy the space. "It's been vacant for nearly 6 months," he said, as he handed me the keys, his eyes not quite meeting mine. Good to have someone bringing life back into the place. I should have asked why it had remained empty for so long in such a desirable neighborhood. I should have questioned why the previous tenant left without taking all their belongings. But the rent was too good to pass up, and I was too excited about my fresh start in a new city to dwell on such details. Among the items left behind was an ornate full-length mirror in the bedroom. It stood nearly 7 feet tall with an antique brass frame decorated with intricate vine patterns and small, almost imperceptible faces hidden among the leaves. Mr. Finch had offered to remove it, but I decided to keep it. It matched the vintage aesthetic I was going for, and buying a new mirror of that quality would have been beyond my budget. "It's quite old," Mr. Finch had mentioned, his hand lingering on the frame. "Been here since the building was constructed in 1897. Some say it was imported from Venice." The first 2 weeks passed uneventfully. I settled into my new job, arranged my furniture, and began establishing routines. The mirror served its purpose without incident, reflecting my morning rituals and evening exhaustion with perfect fidelity, until that Tuesday morning. I was running late for work, hastily shaving in front of the bathroom mirror. Not the antique one, just a simple medicine cabinet mirror. I nicked my chin, cursed, and reached for a tissue. That's when I noticed it. As I moved my hand toward my face, there was a slight delay, perhaps half a second, before my reflection followed suit. I froze, hand midair, staring at my reflection. It completed the motion I had halted, reaching all the way to the chin before stopping as well. I blinked rapidly, convinced I was seeing things due to my rushed morning and lack of coffee. "Just tired," I muttered, finishing my shave more carefully and hurrying out the door. But the incident lingered in my mind throughout the day. Had I actually seen a delay? Or was it just my imagination? I found myself thinking about quantum physics and the impossibility of what I thought I'd witnessed. Light simply doesn't work that way. Reflections don't lag behind reality. That evening I conducted a simple experiment. Standing before the bathroom mirror, I raised my hand quickly and then stopped. The reflection followed normally, with no perceptible delay. I tried several more movements, waving, jumping, making faces, all with perfectly synchronized results. "See? Just tired," I reassured myself, chuckling at my own foolishness. Then I walked into the bedroom and stood before the antique mirror. I raised my hand slowly, watching carefully. The reflection moved in perfect synchronization. I nodded, smiled, turned sideways. All normal. Perhaps I was being paranoid. But I decided to try one more test. I raised my hand quickly and then stopped abruptly. The reflection continued the motion for a fraction of a second after I had stopped. My heart skipped a beat. I repeated the movement faster this time. Again there was a delay, now nearly a full second, before my reflection caught up with me. I stepped closer to the mirror, examining its surface for signs of some technological trickery, some hidden screen or projection system, but found only cold, solid glass. "This is impossible," I whispered, and watched as my reflection's lips formed the words a moment after I spoke them. That night, I covered the mirror with a bedsheet before going to sleep. I told myself it was to prevent the moonlight from reflecting into my eyes, but the truth was, I couldn't bear the thought of that mirror watching me while I slept, perhaps moving when I wasn't looking. The next morning, I awoke to find the sheet on the floor. I was certain I had secured it tightly over the mirror frame. Had it fallen naturally, or had it been removed? The thought sent a chill down my spine. At work, I researched mirror phenomena, finding mostly superstitions and folklore, nothing about delayed reflections. During my lunch break, I called my friend Michael, who taught physics at the university. Delayed reflections? That's not physically possible, he said, laughing. Light travels too fast for you to perceive any natural delay. Whatever you're seeing, it's either an optical illusion or your brain playing tricks on you. Could you come over and see for yourself? I asked. Sure. How about Friday after work? That gave me 2 more days to document what was happening. I decided to record video evidence using my phone. That evening, I set up my phone on a tripod facing the mirror and performed a series of movements, waving, jumping, dancing awkwardly. When I played back the recording, my blood ran cold. The video showed me moving normally, but my reflection in the mirror was clearly delayed by about 2 seconds now. Even more disturbing, there were moments when the reflection's eyes seemed to look directly at the camera, even though mine were focused elsewhere. I watched the video 17 times that night, analyzing every frame, trying to find some rational explanation. There was none. By Thursday morning, the delay had increased to approximately 5 seconds. I stood before the mirror, raising my hand and counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and only then did my reflection's hand begin to move. I called in sick to work and spent the day researching the building's history and the origins of the mirror. The apartment building had been constructed by a wealthy businessman named Edward Harrow, who had allegedly been interested in occult practices. Several residents had died under mysterious circumstances over the decades, including a young woman in my very apartment in 1954, who was found staring at her own reflection, her eyes wide with terror, her heart having simply stopped. As for the mirror, I could find little information, beyond what Mr. Finch had told me, that it was likely from Venice. But in my research, I discovered that Venetian mirrors from that era were often created using secret techniques on the island of Murano, and some were rumored to have unusual properties due to the addition of unusual elements in the silvering process. That evening, Michael called to cancel our Friday meeting. A family emergency required him to leave town immediately. I was disappointed but understood. Still, I needed someone to witness what was happening, so I invited my neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, to come over for tea. I have this antique mirror, I explained when she arrived, and I'm curious what you think of it. Mrs. Chen examined the mirror with appreciation. Very beautiful craftsmanship. You don't see work like this anymore. Could you stand in front of it? I asked hesitantly. Just for a moment. She gave me an odd look but obliged. I watched carefully as she smoothed her silver hair and adjusted her cardigan. Her reflection performed the same actions in perfect synchronization. What am I supposed to be seeing? She asked after a moment. I stepped into view beside her, waved my hand and counted silently. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now the delay was even longer, but Mrs. Chen's reflection continued to move in perfect time with her. Your reflection, I said, pointing. It's delayed. Can't you see it? Mrs. Chen looked concerned. Your reflection looks normal to me, dear. Perhaps you're working too hard at that new job. After she left, I stood alone before the mirror, watching as my reflection stared back at me with an increasingly significant delay. Now it was nearly 10 seconds behind my movements. I raised my hand, lowered it, and waited. 10 seconds later, my reflection repeated the action. But then something happened that made my heart nearly stop. As my reflection lowered its hand, it didn't return to a neutral position as I had. Instead, it slowly raised its hand to its lips in a shushing gesture, index finger pressed against its mouth. I hadn't made that movement. I stumbled backward, nearly falling over my bed. My reflection remained standing, its fingers still pressed against its lips, its eyes locked with mine. Then, very deliberately, it smiled a smile. I wasn't making. I ran from the room, slamming the door behind me. I spent that night on my couch, unable to sleep, unable to process what I had seen. In the morning, I called Mr. Finch. "The mirror," I said without preamble when he answered. "I need to know everything about it." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, he sighed heavily. "I was afraid of this. Has it started moving independently?" My blood turned to ice. "You knew." "It's happened before," he admitted. "The previous tenant experienced something similar, as did the one before her." "Why didn't you warn me?" I demanded, anger temporarily overriding my fear. "Would you have believed me? Would you have taken the apartment if I'd told you the mirror sometimes develops a mind of its own?" His voice was tired, resigned. "Besides, it doesn't happen with everyone. Some tenants live there for years without incident." "What is it? What's happening to the mirror?" "I don't know exactly," Mr. Finch replied. "My grandfather acquired it in the 1920s. There are stories, legends about mirrors that can trap souls or serve as doorways. I've always dismissed them as superstition. But, how do I stop it?" I interrupted. "How did the others make it stop?" Another long pause. "They didn't. They moved out. All of them, and the woman in 1954. The one who died." Mr. Finch's sharp intake of breath was answer enough. "How did you know about her?" "Research," I said grimly. "Was it the mirror that killed her?" "No one knows for certain. She was found in front of it. That's all. Heart failure, they said." After hanging up, I knew I should pack my things and leave immediately. That would be the rational response. But something kept me there. Curiosity, perhaps, or a stubborn refusal to be driven from my home by something I didn't understand. And beneath it all, a growing suspicion that the mirror wouldn't let me leave so easily. I decided to document everything. I set up cameras in the bedroom, positioned to capture both me and the mirror's reflection. I kept a detailed journal of the delay times and any unusual behaviors. By evening, the delay had increased to 15 seconds, and twice I observed my reflection making subtle movements. I hadn't made tilting its head slightly, flexing its fingers when mine were still. That night, I dragged my mattress into the living room, unwilling to sleep in the same room as the mirror. I fell into an uneasy sleep around midnight, only to jolt awake at 3:17 a.m. According to my phone, something had woken me, a sound perhaps, or simply the weight of being watched. I lay perfectly still, listening. The apartment was silent, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Slowly, I sat up and looked toward the hallway leading to my bedroom. The bedroom door was open. I was certain I had closed it, and standing in the doorway, barely visible in the darkness, was a silhouette, my silhouette, but somehow wrong. The proportions were slightly off, the posture too rigid. I fumbled for my phone, turning on its flashlight. The hallway was empty, heart pounding. I approached the bedroom cautiously, phone held out before me like a talisman. The room appeared normal at first glance. Then I noticed the mirror. The sheet I had placed over it before leaving the room was on the floor again, and the reflection in the mirror wasn't showing my bedroom at all. It showed my living room, with the rumpled mattress where I had been sleeping moments before. I backed away, returning to the living room to gather my thoughts. This was beyond physics, beyond rational explanation. Whatever was happening, I needed help, professional help. In the morning, I would contact specialist paranormal investigators, physicists, anyone who might shed light on my situation. But morning felt very far away. I tried to stay awake, but exhaustion eventually overcame me. I drifted off sometime around dawn, only to be awakened by my alarm at 7:30 a.m. Sunlight streamed through the windows, making the night's terrors seem distant and almost foolish. I approached the bedroom cautiously. The mirror appeared normal in the daylight, reflecting the room exactly as it should. I stood before it, watching as my reflection now followed my movements with a delay of nearly 20 seconds. I raised my hand, lowered it, turned in a circle, and 20 seconds later, my reflection performed the same actions. But when my reflection should have completed the turn, it stopped halfway, facing sideways while I faced the mirror directly. Then, with deliberate slowness, it turned its head, just its head, to look at me. Our eyes met, and I saw something in its gaze that hadn't been there before: awareness, recognition, intent. It raised its hand and pressed it against the inside of the mirror. I watched, paralyzed, as the glass surface began to ripple like water where its hand touched. The ripples spread outward, distorting the reflection, making the room behind it waver and shift until it no longer resembled my bedroom at all, but some darker, inverted version of it. The reflection smiled, a cold, calculating smile I had never worn in my life, and began to push its arm through the rippling surface, reaching out toward me. I ran. I spent that day at the university library, researching everything I could find about mirrors, dimensional gateways, doppelgangers, and Venetian glass making. I discovered references to soul mirrors, allegedly created by a secretive guild of Murano glassmakers who had been excommunicated by the Catholic Church in the late 16th century. These mirrors were said to create a delayed reflection because they were actually showing not the present self, but a version of the soul from moments before, and in some cases, this soul reflection could develop independence. The text suggested that once the delay reached 24 seconds, representing a full day in the mirror realm's time, the reflection would be fully autonomous and could potentially cross over into our world, trapping the original person in the mirror as a replacement. By my calculations, I had less than a day before the delay reached that critical threshold. I called Mr. Finch again, demanding he help me remove the mirror from the apartment. He agreed to send movers the following morning. Not soon enough, but it was the best he could do. That left me with one night to survive. I returned to the apartment at dusk, armed with knowledge and desperate determination. I had purchased heavy-duty garbage bags, duct tape, and a sledgehammer from a hardware store. My plan was simple: cover the mirror completely, and if that failed, destroy it. The bedroom was exactly as I had left it, the mirror standing innocuously against the wall. My reflection appeared in it as I entered, now following my movements with a delay of nearly 22 seconds. I approached cautiously, garbage bags in hand. As I began to cover the mirror, my reflection watched with evident amusement, making no move to follow my actions. Once the mirror was completely covered and secured with duct tape, I stepped back, breathing heavily. For a moment I thought it had worked. The room was quiet, normal. Then I heard a soft tapping from behind the plastic covering. Tap, 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 like fingernails against glass. I backed away, sledgehammer gripped tightly in my hands. The tapping continued, growing louder, more insistent. Then it stopped abruptly, replaced by a sound like tearing fabric. The plastic covering began to bulge outward, as if something were pushing against it from inside the mirror. I raised the sledgehammer, ready to swing, when my phone rang. The sudden noise startled me, breaking my focus. It was Mr. Finch. "Don't break the mirror," he shouted, as soon as I answered. "I found some information. Breaking it could release whatever's inside, or worse, trap you there forever." "Then what do I do?" I demanded, watching as the plastic continued to bulge and stretch. "It's trying to come through. There's a ritual," he said quickly. "The previous tenant found it but left before trying it. You need to." The call dropped. I tried to redial, but there was no signal. The bulge in the plastic had grown larger, now resembling a human form pressing against it. I could see the outline of a face, hands pushing against the barrier. The plastic split open with a loud tearing sound, and a hand emerged my hand, yet not mine. The fingers were longer, the nails slightly curved like claws. It groped blindly in the air, for a moment before finding purchase on the frame, then began to pull the rest of the body through. I backed away until I hit the wall, still clutching the sledgehammer. The figure emerging from the mirror was me or something wearing my appearance like an ill-fitting suit. Its movements were fluid but wrong, like a marionette controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. Its eyes, when they fixed on me, held no humanity at all. 23 seconds, it said, its voice an unsettling echo of my own. Almost time for the exchange. "What are you?" I managed to ask. It tilted its head at an impossible angle. "I'm you, the better version, the one who's been watching and learning from behind the glass for centuries." It took a step toward me, its movements becoming more natural with each passing moment. So many before you, so many reflections to absorb, to become. I raised the sledgehammer defensively. "Stay back." It laughed my laugh, but hollow and cold. "You can't harm me without harming yourself. We're connected, you and I. For now." It glanced at my phone on the floor. "Your landlord was going to tell you about the ritual, wasn't he? The binding ritual that could trap me in the mirror forever." My heart raced. "There was a way to stop this. Too bad you'll never know what it is," it continued, taking another step closer. "In 1 minute, when the delay reaches 24 seconds, our places will be exchanged. I will live your life better than you ever did, and you will spend eternity behind the glass, watching, always watching but never touching." I had to stall, had to think. What kind of ritual could bind this thing? In all my research about soul mirrors, there had been mentions of blood rituals, of true names, of reflections. "You're not me," I said suddenly, lowering the sledgehammer. "You're just a reflection, a copy, a shadow." It frowned, the first expression I'd seen on its face that seemed genuinely its own. "I am more than you could ever be." "Prove it," I challenged. "If you're really better, prove it. Show me who you really are, not just my copied face." Its frown deepened, uncertainty flickering across its features. "You're trying to trick me." "Am I? Or are you afraid to show your true self because you don't have one?" I took a step forward, forcing it to step back. "You're nothing but borrowed images, stolen moments. You have no identity of your own." It snarled, its face contorting in rage. "I have lived 1,000 lives behind the glass. I have watched humanity from my prison for centuries. Then show me," I insisted. "Show me your true face." For a moment it seemed confused, its borrowed features shifting slightly, as if struggling to maintain form. Then, with a growl of frustration, it lunged at me. I was ready. I sidestepped its attack and swung the sledgehammer, not at it, but at the floor in front of the mirror. The hardwood splintered with a satisfying crack. I swung again and again, creating a jagged line across the floor. The creature stumbled, suddenly disoriented. "What are you doing?" it demanded. I didn't answer, continuing to destroy the floor in a circle around the mirror. With each impact, the creature seemed to weaken, its form becoming less solid, more transparent. "The connection," it hissed, realization dawning in its eyes. "You're breaking the connection to the mirror." I had guessed correctly. The mirror's power was tied to its location, to the specific spot where it had stood for over a century. By destroying that physical connection, I was weakening its hold on our reality. The creature lunged for the mirror, desperate to return to its sanctuary, but I blocked its path with the sledgehammer. "Not so fast," I said. "You wanted to be in this world. Then stay here and face it without your power." It screamed, a sound no human throat could produce, as its form began to dissolve, becoming transparent like mist in morning sunlight. It reached for me with fading hands, its face a mask of hatred and fear. "This isn't over," it whispered as it faded. "There are more mirrors, more reflections. We are always watching, always waiting for the delay." And then it was gone, leaving only a faint shimmer in the air like heat rising from pavement. I turned to the mirror, half expecting to see some new horror within it, but found only my own reflection, moving in perfect synchronization with me. The delay was gone. Mr. Finch arrived with movers the next morning. When I told him what had happened, he seemed both relieved and troubled. "The mirror must be destroyed," he said firmly. "Properly this time. With the right precautions." I agreed, watching as the movers carefully removed it from the wall, revealing faded wallpaper behind it, in the shape of a perfect rectangle, evidence of how long it had hung there, unchanged and waiting. As they carried it away, wrapped in protective blankets, I caught one final glimpse of my reflection in its surface. For just a moment, so brief, I might have imagined it. I thought I saw my reflection smile as I remained expressionless. I moved out of the apartment the following week. Some experiences change you forever, alter how you perceive the world around you. Now I avoid mirrors when possible, and when I must use them, I never linger before my reflection. I never stare into my own eyes for too long, searching for signs of delay, for evidence that what looks back at me is truly me. Because sometimes in certain lights at certain angles, I could swear my reflection moves just a fraction of a second too late. Story 2. I never thought silence could be so terrifying. As a sound engineer, I've spent my career chasing the perfect audio, capturing everything from the delicate rustle of leaves to the thunderous roar of waterfalls. My colleagues often joked that I could hear a pin drop from across a crowded room. That sensitivity to sound, that hyper-awareness of the auditory world around me, was my greatest professional asset, until it became my worst nightmare. It started 3 weeks ago when I received a commission from a prestigious nature documentary. They needed pristine audio recordings from the remote mountain village of Ocolo for an episode about America's disappearing rural soundscapes. The village was nestled in a valley surrounded by ancient forests, miles from any major highway or flight path, a sound engineer's paradise. "You'll love it there, Daniel," my producer had said. "The locals say you can hear the mountains breathe at dawn." The drive to Ocolo took nearly 6 hours from the nearest city, the last 2 on winding mountain roads that seemed to deliberately lead me away from civilization. My GPS lost signal about 10 miles out, forcing me to rely on printed directions. As the sun began to set, I finally spotted the wooden sign welcoming me to Ocolo. Population. My first impression was of a picturesque mountain community, the kind that appears on postcards and calendars. Main Street featured quaint shops with hand-painted signs, a small diner with checkered curtains, and a white church steeple rising above the tree line. I pulled up to the Ocolo Inn, a converted Victorian house that served as the town's only accommodation for visitors. Mrs. Winters, the innkeeper, was a plump woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes. She welcomed me warmly, though I noticed something odd about her manner, a certain tension in her movements, a vigilance in her gaze that seemed out of place in such a peaceful setting. "We don't get many visitors this time of year," she said, handing me an old brass key. "Room 3, top of the stairs. Breakfast is at 7. I thanked her and asked about good locations for recording natural soundscapes. "The old bridge by Miller's Creek has lovely acoustics," she offered, "and the forest trail that leads to Eagle's Point." But she hesitated, glancing at the darkening window. "Best to finish your work before sundown." I thought it was strange advice, but assumed it had to do with safety concerns about navigating unfamiliar terrain in the dark. After settling into my room, I decided to take a short walk through town to get my bearings before dinner. That's when I first noticed something unusual about Ocolo. It was too quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of a small town evening, but an unnatural silence that felt heavy, oppressive. I've recorded in remote locations all over the world, and even the most isolated places have their own symphony. Insects, birds, wind through trees, distant animal calls. But here the silence felt absolute, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I pulled out my portable recorder and checked the levels. The meter barely registered ambient sound. Puzzled, I increased the gain to maximum sensitivity, a setting I normally use only for capturing the faintest sounds. Still, the input remained unnaturally low. As I walked down Main Street, I passed a few locals who nodded politely but didn't speak. The diner was open, its windows glowing with warm light, but even as I approached, I couldn't hear the typical clatter of dishes or murmur of conversation you'd expect. I stepped inside, and the bell above the door made a motion, as if it should ring, but no sound came. The waitress, her name tag read, Jenny, smiled and gestured to an empty booth. I sat down, increasingly disturbed by the silence. When she approached with a menu, I cleared my throat. "Quiet evening," I commented. She looked at me strangely, then reached for a notepad in her apron pocket and wrote, "What can I get you?" I frowned. "Is everything okay?" She wrote again, "You must be new. No sound after sunset. How special is meatloaf?" I stared at her note, confusion giving way to unease. "What do you mean? No sound after sunset?" Jenny glanced nervously at the other patrons, then scribbled quickly, "We don't talk about it. Not safe. Order food or leave. Please." My appetite suddenly gone. I ordered coffee just to have a reason to stay and observe. The diner held about a dozen people, all eating in complete silence. No clink of silverware against plates, no scrape of chairs, no sipping sounds, nothing. Yet they all acted as if this was perfectly normal, communicating with gestures and the occasional written note. When Jenny brought my coffee, I wrote on a napkin, "What's happening here?" She hesitated before writing back, "Started 3 days ago. First the birds went silent, then everything else. Don't try to make noise after dark. Those who did disappeared." A chill ran down my spine. I wanted to dismiss it as some elaborate prank on the outsider, but the fear in Jenny's eyes seemed genuine. I finished my coffee quickly, left cash on the table, and headed back to the inn, my mind racing with questions. That night, I lay awake in my bed, listening to the absence of sound, no creaking floorboards, no distant traffic, no wind against the windows. Not even the sound of my own breathing seemed to reach my ears, though I could feel my chest rising and falling. I held my wristwatch close to my ear. The ticking was visible, but inaudible. Sleep eventually came, troubled and thin. I dreamed of voices calling from great distances, growing fainter until they vanished completely. Morning arrived with blessed normality. Birdsong filtered through my window, and the floorboards creaked reassuringly under my feet. Downstairs, Mrs. Winters was preparing breakfast, the sizzle of bacon and clatter of pans creating a symphony. I never thought I'd be so grateful to hear. "Sleep well?" she asked, pouring coffee into a mug. "Not really," I admitted. "What happened last night? Why did all sound disappear after sunset?" Her hands trembled slightly as she set down the coffee pot. "So you noticed. Hard not to. Is this some kind of local phenomenon? Sound doesn't just vanish." Mrs. Winters glanced around as if checking that we were alone. "It started 3 days ago. At first we thought it was something wrong with our ears, some kind of mass hysteria. Maybe the mayor called in doctors from the next town over, but they couldn't find anything physically wrong with us. And the disappearances, the waitress at the diner mentioned people vanishing." She nodded grimly. 5 so far, all after making noise at night. Sheriff Miller was the first fired his gun during the initial silent night, investigating what he thought might be prowlers at the general store. Next morning, his deputy found his patrol car parked in the middle of Main Street, engine running, lights on. No sign of Miller. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. "Have you contacted outside authorities?" State police, Fowler, Mayor Peterson, and 2 volunteers drove out to get help yesterday morning. They haven't returned. I pulled out my phone to check, no signal, as expected. "What about internet?" "Down since it started. We're completely cut off." The implications were staggering. An entire town isolated and experiencing an impossible phenomenon, with people disappearing. Part of me wanted to pack my equipment and leave immediately, but professional curiosity and genuine concern for these people kept me rooted. "I have sensitive audio equipment," I said. "Maybe I can help figure out what's happening." Mrs. Winters looked doubtful but nodded. "Be careful, and remember, when sunset comes, no matter what happens, make no sound." I spent the morning setting up recording equipment around town, high-sensitivity microphones, capable of picking up frequencies beyond human hearing. The townspeople watched me with a mixture of curiosity and hope, some approaching to share their experiences through hastily written notes. Old Mr. Jenkins wrote that he'd heard something moving during the second night of silence, though he couldn't see anything. The school teacher, Miss Abernathy, claimed the silence felt thickest near the old church at the edge of town. Several people mentioned the forest surrounding Oak Hollow seemed different, somehow darker, more watchful. By midday, I had collected hours of recordings and was back in my room at the inn, analyzing the data. The daytime audio was normal, perhaps a bit sparse in terms of wildlife sounds, but nothing that would raise immediate alarm. What interested me were the unusual frequency patterns that appeared intermittently, subtle oscillations that didn't match any natural or mechanical source I recognized. As the afternoon wore on, I noticed the ambient sounds gradually diminishing, like someone slowly turning down the volume on reality. By the time the sun touched the horizon, that unnatural silence had descended once more. I sat in my room, headphones on, monitoring my equipment. The meters showed something extraordinary. Sound was still being produced, but it wasn't reaching the human ear. It was as if something was intercepting the sound waves, harvesting them before they could complete their journey. Suddenly, my recorder picked up something new, a low-frequency vibration that made the headphones tremble against my ears. It wasn't sound exactly, more like the pressure wave that precedes sound, and it was moving, traveling through town in a deliberate pattern. I grabbed my directional microphone and pointed it toward the window. The vibration intensified. Something was out there, moving through the silent streets. Curiosity overcame caution. I slipped downstairs, careful not to make the floorboards creak, and made my way outside. The town was bathed in moonlight, every surface sharp and clear in the mountain air. I followed the vibration readings on my equipment, which led me toward the old church Miss Abernathy had mentioned. The white clapboard building stood silhouetted against the night sky, its steeple reaching like a bony finger toward the stars. As I approached, my equipment registered stronger vibrations, pulsing now in a rhythm that almost resembled breathing. The church door stood slightly ajar. I hesitated, every instinct warning me to turn back, but I needed answers. Slowly, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior was dark, except for moonlight streaming through stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across empty pews. My equipment was going haywire now, the meters spiking erratically. I moved toward the altar, where the readings were strongest. That's when I saw it, or rather didn't see it. There was a distortion in the air, like heat waves rising from hot pavement, but it was night and cool. The distortion had a vague shape, humanoid but wrong, somehow too tall, too thin, with proportions that hurt my eyes to focus on, and it was collecting sound. I could see it now through my equipment's frequency visualizer, sound waves being pulled toward the entity, like water down a drain. Not just ambient noise, but something more fundamental, as if it was feeding on the very concept of sound itself. In my shock, I gasped, or tried to. No sound emerged, but the entity noticed. The distortion turned toward me, though it had no discernible face or eyes. I felt a pressure in my ears, building painfully, as if something was reaching inside my head, searching for sounds to extract. I ran, out of the church, down the street, not caring about the noise my feet should have made on the pavement, back to the inn, up the stairs into my room where I barricaded the door with a dresser. My heart pounded in my chest, but I couldn't hear it. I couldn't hear my ragged breathing or my hands frantically gathering equipment. The silence was absolute, oppressive, almost a physical presence pressing against my skin. I had to warn the others. Whatever this entity was, it wasn't just collecting ambient sound. It was hunting those who made noise, taking them for some unknown purpose. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When sound finally returned with the dawn, I rushed to find Mrs. Winters and showed her my recordings and data. She gathered the town council and I explained what I'd witnessed. It's feeding on sound, I told the grim-faced group gathered in the town hall, and I think it's getting stronger. Each night, the silence falls faster, lasts longer. What does it want? asked Mayor Peterson's wife, who had taken charge in his absence. I don't know, I admitted, but I think the disappearances are connected. It's not just taking sound, it's taking people who make sound when it's feeding. So we stay quiet at night, said the blacksmith, a burly man named Hank. We've been doing that anyway. I shook my head. It's getting hungrier. Last night I made no sound at all, but it still sensed me somehow. I think eventually it won't matter if we're quiet or not. What do we do? Mrs. Peterson asked, fear evident in her voice. I had been thinking about this all morning. Sound is vibration energy. This entity feeds on that energy. What if we overload it? Give it more than it can handle? My plan was desperate but simple. We would gather every device capable of producing sound: car horns, emergency sirens, speakers, musical instruments, and create a synchronized blast of noise at sunset. When the entity first appeared to feed, the town mobilized with surprising efficiency. By late afternoon, Main Street had been transformed into an arsenal of sound. Cars lined up with engines running, horns ready. The volunteer fire department had their siren prepared. Every speaker and amplifier had been collected from homes and businesses, connected to a makeshift sound system. I had programmed a specific frequency pattern, one designed to create maximum disruption, based on the entity's feeding patterns I'd observed. As the sun began to set, we gathered in the town square, tension thick in the air. Remember, I said to the assembled townspeople, once the silence falls, we hit it with everything at once. Don't hold back. The sun dipped below the horizon. We waited, watching as familiar sounds began to fade, first distant noises, then closer ones, until that unnatural silence enveloped us completely. I raised my hand, counting down with my fingers. 3, 2, 1. I pressed the button on my equipment, and chaos erupted, or should have. Car horns, sirens, speakers, people shouting at the top of their lungs, all creating vibrations that registered on my equipment, but produced no audible sound. The entity was already too strong, intercepting every sound wave before it could reach our ears. But my instruments showed something else. The vibrations were reaching their target. The distortion appeared in the center of the town square, larger than before, pulsating as it absorbed the barrage of sound we hurled at it. For a moment I thought our plan was working. The entity seemed to swell, its outline becoming more defined as it gorged itself on our offering. Then something went horribly wrong. The distortion collapsed in on itself like a star going supernova, and exploded outward in a wave of pressure that knocked people to the ground. And suddenly, we could hear again. But what we heard was nightmarish. Every sound that had been taken over the past 3 days came rushing back all at once, a cacophonous hell of overlapping noises, screams, conversations, footsteps, animal calls, all playing simultaneously. Among them, distinctly, were the voices of the missing people, their final moments preserved, and now regurgitated in this torrent of sound. The townspeople covered their ears, some falling to their knees in pain. Blood trickled from Mrs. Winter's nose as she staggered against a lamppost. The assault on our senses was unbearable, like a physical weight crushing down on us, and through it all the entity began to take a more solid form, still translucent, but now clearly visible, a towering figure with elongated limbs, and a head that split open vertically, revealing not a mouth but something like an organic satellite dish, designed to capture and process sound. It moved through the crowd, touching people with impossibly long fingers. Each person it touched went rigid, then collapsed. Their voices suddenly added to the horrific chorus, filling the air. I stumbled back toward the inn, my equipment clutched to my chest. This wasn't just about feeding, the entity was using sound to communicate, to transform. Our attack hadn't weakened it. We'd given it exactly what it needed to fully manifest in our world. I locked myself in my room, frantically reviewing my data, searching for anything that might help us. The recordings from the church showed something I'd missed before. Beneath the entity's feeding pattern was another frequency, a constant pulse that seemed to originate from somewhere beneath the town. The basement. Every old building in Ocala had one, including the inn. I grabbed my directional microphone and made my way downstairs, following the pulse that only my equipment could detect. Mrs. Winter's storage basement was cluttered with old furniture and boxes of memorabilia. I moved through the space, watching the signal strengthen as I approached the back wall. There, behind a shelf of preserves, I found a door I doubted even Mrs. Winters knew existed, small, ancient, with strange symbols carved into the wood. The pulse was coming from behind it. I hesitated, knowing I should find help, but outside the chaos continued screams and impossible noise, as the entity claimed more victims. There wasn't time. I pushed the door open and found a narrow tunnel leading downward, carved directly into the bedrock beneath the town. My flashlight revealed crude steps descending into darkness. The pulse grew stronger as I made my way down, the air becoming cold and damp. After what seemed like an eternity, the tunnel opened into a chamber. My flashlight beam fell upon a sight that defied comprehension, a stone altar in the center of the room, and embedded in it, a device that was neither fully mechanical nor organic. It pulsed with an internal light, sending out those rhythmic vibrations my equipment had detected. Ancient symbols surrounded the altar, similar to those on the door, but more elaborate. They weren't like any language I recognized, yet somehow I understood their meaning. This was a beacon activated 3 days ago, after centuries of dormancy, calling the entity to this place, and I wasn't alone in the chamber. A figure stepped from the shadows, Mayor Peterson, his eyes vacant, movement stiff, as if his body was being operated by an unfamiliar pilot. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, but his voice was wrong, layered with other voices speaking in unison. "What is this place?" I demanded. "What have you done?" "We prepared the way," the mayor replied in that disturbing chorus of voices. "This town was founded for one purpose: to serve as the gateway when the time was right. For generations we've waited. The knowledge passed down through select families. You're bringing that thing here deliberately. It's killing people, not killing. Harvesting. The Sound Eater doesn't consume life, it consumes identity. The unique frequency of each human voice contains the essence of who they are. It needs these essences to fully cross into this world." I backed toward the tunnel entrance. "Why would you help it?" The mayor's face split into an unnatural smile. "Because it promised us transcendence. In exchange for our help, we will become like it, beings of pure vibration, freed from physical form. The sacrifice of a few hundred souls is nothing compared to the evolution we will undergo." I ran, up the tunnel, through the basement, out into the street where the nightmare continued. The entity had grown, now towering above the buildings, its form flickering between solid and gaseous states. All around, townspeople were either fleeing or standing in trance-like states, their voices being pulled from their bodies in visible streams of vibrating energy. I had to destroy the beacon. It was the only way to stop this. I raced to my room and grabbed the only thing I could think of that might help: a feedback loop amplifier. I'd been designed to create controlled acoustic feedback for special audio effects. If I could connect it to the beacon, the resulting feedback might overload the system. Armed with this desperate hope, I fought my way back through the chaos to the hidden door. The mayor was gone, presumably rejoined with the entity above. I descended into the chamber and approached the pulsing beacon. Up close, it was even more alien, a fusion of technology and organic material that seemed to breathe and calculate simultaneously. I connected my amplifier to what appeared to be the beacon's primary resonator and activated the feedback loop. The effect was immediate and terrifying. A high-pitched whine erupted from the device, quickly building to an unbearable screech that made the very air vibrate. The beacon's pulsing became erratic, its light fluctuating wildly. Above, I heard a sound that defied description, part scream, part electronic distortion. As the entity reacted to the disruption of its gateway, the chamber began to shake, dust and small rocks raining down from the ceiling. I ran for the tunnel, the unholy noise of the feedback loop pursuing me like a physical force. Behind me, the chamber collapsed with a deafening roar. The tunnel itself was beginning to crumble as I scrambled upward, rocks and debris missing me by inches. I burst into the basement, just as the hidden door and the tunnel behind it collapsed completely. The noise outside had changed, no longer a cacophony of stolen sounds, but genuine human screams and shouts of confusion. I staggered outside to find the entity writhing in the sky above Okolo, its form destabilizing, the stolen voices escaping its grasp like luminous smoke. As the connection to whatever dimension it came from was severed, the creature began to fold in on itself, collapsing into a singularity that vanished with a thunderclap that shattered windows throughout the town. In the aftermath, as dawn broke over Okolo, we counted our losses. 12 people gone without a trace, presumably consumed completely before we destroyed the beacon. Among them was Mrs. Winters, who I later learned had been one of the select families the mayor mentioned, willing cultists who had maintained the secret for generations. The survivors were left with fragmented memories and a profound appreciation for the sounds they had nearly lost forever. Conversations, laughter, music, even the simple comfort of hearing one's own heartbeat. As for me, I stayed long enough to give my statement to the authorities who finally arrived, though I doubt my account appears in any official report. Some truths are too strange to be acknowledged in the light of day. I still work as a sound engineer, still chase perfect audio in remote locations. But now I'm more cautious about the silence between sounds, more aware of the vibrations that connect us all. And sometimes, in the deepest quiet of night, I think I can still hear it, that subtle pulse, calling from beyond, hungry for the music of human voices. Because I know now that true silence doesn't exist in our world, and we should be grateful for that. Story 3. I first noticed something was off about Mark on a Tuesday morning. It was subtle, the way he smiled at me across the conference table. Mark had always had this nervous habit of biting his fingernails during meetings, especially when the quarterly reports were being discussed. But that day his hands remained perfectly still, fingers pristine and untouched. His smile, too, was different. Mark's smile had always been slightly crooked, higher on the left side. Now it was perfectly symmetrical. Great presentation, don't you think? He asked me as we filed out of the conference room. Yeah, sure, I replied, trying not to stare at his hands. Hey, did you do something different? Haircut, maybe? Mark laughed. Another thing that sounded wrong. His laugh had always been a short, staccato burst. This was smooth, measured. No changes here, buddy. Same old Mark. But he wasn't. I was certain of it. I might have dismissed it as my imagination, if it had ended there. Perhaps Mark had finally kicked his nail-biting habit. Perhaps he'd been practicing his smile in the mirror. People change small behaviors all the time, right? Then I noticed the changes in my wife, Sarah. Sarah and I had been married for 8 years. In that time, I'd become intimately familiar with her allergic reaction to cats. The immediate sneezing, the watery eyes, the slight rash that would appear on her neck. We'd had to decline countless dinner invitations to friends with cats, and she always carried antihistamines in her purse. So when her sister dropped by unexpectedly with her new kitten, I braced myself for the inevitable reaction. Sarah's sister Lisa was always inconsiderate that way. "Oh my God, he's adorable," Sarah exclaimed, taking the kitten from Lisa's arms and burying her face in its fur. I waited for the sneezing to start. It didn't. "Aren't you allergic?" I asked carefully, watching as she nuzzled the kitten against her cheek. Sarah looked at me with mild confusion. "What do you mean? I've never been allergic to cats." Lisa laughed. "Of course she isn't. Remember how we had 3 cats growing up?" But that wasn't right. Sarah had told me numerous times that she'd always wanted cats as a child, but their mother was the one with the allergy. It had been a source of childhood disappointment for her. "Must be thinking of someone else," Sarah said lightly, returning her attention to the kitten. That night I lay awake beside her, listening to her breathing. It was steady, rhythmic, too perfect somehow. Sarah had always been a slightly restless sleeper, occasionally snoring when she had a cold. Now she slept like someone in a commercial for mattresses, peaceful, still, undisturbed. In the darkness I studied her profile. Was her nose slightly different? the curve of her jaw more defined, or was I losing my mind? The next morning, I called my friend Daniel, a psychiatrist. Could be Capgras delusion, he said, after I explained my concerns, careful to frame them as hypothetical. It's a psychiatric disorder where someone believes people close to them have been replaced by identical-looking imposters, but what if they really are different? I asked, hearing the desperation in my voice. That's exactly what someone with Capgras would say. Daniel replied gently, maybe you're working too hard. When's the last time you took a vacation? I thanked him and hung up, unsatisfied. This wasn't in my head, something was happening. Over the next few weeks I started noticing more replacements. My neighbor who suddenly switched from smoking menthols to regular cigarettes after 20 years. My barista who no longer remembered I preferred oat milk. My boss who started wearing brown shoes after a lifetime of black ones. Small changes, tiny inconsistencies, things nobody else seemed to notice or care about. I started keeping a journal, documenting the changes. I took photographs of people I suspected had been replaced, studying them for physical differences. I recorded conversations, looking for linguistic patterns that didn't match my memories. Most disturbing was my growing certainty that Sarah, or whatever was pretending to be Sarah, knew I was onto her. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me when she thought I wasn't looking. Her eyes would be cold, calculating, nothing like the warm gaze I'd fallen in love with. "Is everything okay?" she asked one evening, as I picked at my dinner. "You've been distant lately, just stressed about work?" I lied, avoiding her eyes. "You know you can talk to me about anything," she said, reaching across the table to take my hand. Her touch felt wrong, the temperature slightly off, the pressure too precisely applied. "I know," I said, fighting the urge to pull away. That night I pretended to take a sleeping pill, but actually spit it out when she wasn't looking. After Sarah fell asleep, I carefully slid out of bed and went to her purse. I needed to find something, anything, that would confirm my suspicions. Her wallet contained all the expected items: credit cards, driver's license, insurance card. Everything looked legitimate. Then I found a small business card, tucked into a hidden compartment. It was blank except for an address, and the words "follow up, 10 to 15 inch just 3 days away." I memorized the address, and returned the card exactly as I'd found it. The next day, I called in sick to work, and waited until Sarah left for her job at the real estate office. Then I drove to the address on the card. It was in an industrial area on the outskirts of town, the kind of place filled with nondescript warehouses and offices with generic names. The building matched the address, was labeled Wellness Solutions, with frosted glass doors and minimal signage. It looked like it could be a medical clinic or a tech startup, and deliberately ambiguous. I parked across the street and watched. Over the course of 2 hours I saw several people enter and exit. They all looked normal enough, mix of ages and appearances. Nothing obviously suspicious, until Mark walked out. My coworker Mark, the one with a new smile and pristine fingernails, exited the building at 11:42 a.m., checking his watch as he walked to his car. He should have been at work, in the same meeting I had called in sick to avoid. This couldn't be a coincidence. I returned the next day with a better plan. I wore a baseball cap and sunglasses, and brought a clipboard to look official. When a delivery truck pulled up to the building, I timed my approach to coincide with the driver carrying packages inside. I held the door for him, nodding as if I belonged there, and slipped in behind him. The reception area was minimalist: white walls, gray furniture, a few generic plants. The receptionist was on the phone, and barely glanced at me, as I walked purposefully toward a hallway, as if I knew where I was going.
The hallway led to a series of doors with small windows. Through one, I glimpsed what looked like a standard medical examination room. Through another, something that resembled a laboratory, with people in white coats examining equipment I didn't recognize. I kept walking, heart pounding, until I reached a door marked processing. It was slightly ajar, and I could hear the hum of machinery inside. Carefully I peered through the gap. What I saw made my blood run cold. The room was large, filled with rows of cylindrical tanks. Each tank was about 7 feet tall and 3 feet in diameter. filled with a cloudy blue liquid, and floating in each tank was a human form. They were in various stages of development, some barely more than vague humanoid shapes, others nearly complete, with distinct features. I stifled a gasp as I recognized one of them. It was unmistakably my department head at work, down to the mole on his left cheek, except his eyes were closed, and tubes ran from his arms and neck to machines beside the tank. "Can I help you?" I spun around to find a woman in a white lab coat standing behind me.
She had a pleasant professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I think I'm lost," I stammered. "I was looking for the restroom." "This is a restricted area," she said. Still smiling, "The restrooms are back toward reception. Let me escort you." As we walked, she asked casual questions. Who I was there to see, what department I was looking for. I fabricated answers about a job interview, trying to keep my voice steady. When we reached reception, she pointed me toward the restrooms with that same empty smile. "Have a nice day," she said, but remained watching as I walked away. I didn't go to the restroom. I walked straight out the front door, got in my car, and drove home with shaking hands. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those tanks, those bodying floating in blue liquid. Were they growing new people, replacing existing ones? Why? Who was behind it? I needed more information. Using a library computer rather than my own, I searched for wellness solutions and found nothing useful, just a generic website about innovative health management with no specific services listed. Next, I searched for news stories about personality changes, people acting differently, anything that might connect to what I was seeing. Most results were about mental health conditions or relationship advice. But then I found something. A forum thread titled, "Is anyone else noticing changes in people?" The original poster described exactly what I'd been experiencing, subtle differences in loved ones' behaviors, preferences, mannerisms. Others had chimed in with similar experiences. One comment caught my attention. "It always happens after their annual physical. Every single time, annual physicals." I thought about Sarah. Her personality had changed approximately 2 weeks after her yearly checkup at Westside Medical Group. Mark had his company physical around the time I first noticed his changes. I checked the forum user's profile, hoping to contact them directly, but the account had been deleted. In fact, as I refreshed the page, I saw the entire thread disappearing before my eyes, post by post, as if being systematically removed. I was onto something, and someone didn't want this information public. Back home, I carefully questioned Sarah about her recent physical. Did they do anything different this year? Any new tests or procedures? She looked at me oddly. "No, same as always. Blood work, vitals, the usual questions." "Why?" "Just curious. Mine's coming up next week." Her expression changed subtly, a flicker of something I couldn't identify. "Oh, I thought you usually go in February." She was right. My physical was always in February, not October. I'd never mentioned changing it. They had a cancellation. I lied, thought I'd get it out of the way. "Which doctor are you seeing?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes intent. "Reeves, my usual guy." Sarah nodded and changed the subject. But I'd seen enough. She was interested, too interested, in my medical appointments, and she knew my schedule better than a wife should. It was as if she'd been briefed. That night I pretended to sleep while watching Sarah through barely open eyes. At 2:17 a.m., she carefully got out of bed, taking her phone into the bathroom. I could hear the murmur of her voice but couldn't make out the words. When she returned, I feigned a sleep movement, rolling over and mumbling. She froze for a moment, then slipped back into bed. The next day, I followed her to work, keeping a safe distance. She didn't go to the real estate office. Instead, she drove directly to the Wellness Solutions building. She was inside for 47 minutes before emerging and continuing to her actual workplace. My hands shook as I drove home. My wife, or whatever she was part of this. I spent the afternoon searching our house while Sarah was at work. In her home office, behind a false panel in her desk drawer that I'd never noticed before, I found a tablet computer I'd never seen before. It was password protected. After several failed attempts with birthdays and anniversaries, I tried replacement, and it unlocked. The tablet contained files, hundreds of them. Each was labeled with a name and date. I found one with my name on it, dated 3 years earlier. Inside was everything about me: medical history, psychological profile, daily routines, preferences, relationships, even detailed maps of my walking paths through the house. There were notes about my suitability for replacement and integration challenges. One note read, "Subject's observational skills and pattern recognition abilities, present potential complications, recommend delayed processing until phase 3. I felt sick. They had been watching me, studying me, planning to replace me, but hadn't done so yet, because I was too observant. Other files revealed more. This wasn't a small operation. There were thousands of names, organized by region. Notes referred to integration centers across the country, processing quotas, and adaptation protocols. One document outlined the Human Optimization Initiative, a plan to gradually replace humans with improved versions that were more efficient, healthier, and more compliant. The replacements retained the original's memories, but eliminated inefficient traits like anxiety, addiction, and questioning authority. The document stated, complete societal integration estimated by 2030, with priority replacement of key government, military, and infrastructure positions by 20. It was happening now, all around me. I copied as many files as I could onto a flash drive, then carefully returned the tablet exactly as I'd found it. I needed to expose this, but who could I trust? The files showed that police chiefs, journalists, even a state senator had already been replaced. That evening, I acted as normal as possible around Sarah, though every smile she gave me now seemed sinister. We ate dinner, watched TV, and went through the motions of our routine. When she suggested we have sex, I claimed a headache, unable to bear the thought of being intimate with whatever she had become. The next morning, I called in sick to work again, and drove to the one person I thought might help, Professor Alan Winters. My former college advisor. He'd been a mentor to me, and his expertise in biotechnology might help make sense of what I'd discovered. When I arrived at his university office, he looked exactly as I remembered: rumpled jacket, wild gray hair, kind eyes behind thick glasses. If he'd been replaced, they'd done a perfect job. "This is quite a story," he said after I'd explained everything, careful to leave out the part about Sarah being involved. "May I see these files you mentioned?" I handed him the flash drive, which he plugged into his computer. His expression grew increasingly grave as he scrolled through the documents. "If this is authentic," he said finally, "it represents the most significant threat to humanity in history. Then you believe me. You don't think I'm having some kind of breakdown. The technical specifications in these files are beyond what a layperson could fabricate," he said. "The bioengineering protocols described here are theoretical, cutting-edge concepts I've only seen discussed in classified research papers." He turned to me, his face serious. "Who else have you told about this?" "No one. I didn't know who I could trust." He nodded slowly. "That was wise. We need to be extremely careful about next steps. Professor Winters suggested we take the evidence to a journalist he knew and trusted, someone with the resources to investigate properly, and the platform to expose the truth." He made a phone call, speaking in vague terms about a major story, and arranged a meeting for that evening. I felt a wave of relief. Finally, someone believed me. Finally, we were taking action. "You look exhausted," the professor said. "Why don't you rest here for a bit while I make some more calls? I'll lock the door so no one disturbs you." The adrenaline that had been keeping me going suddenly ebbed, and I realized I hadn't properly slept in days. I nodded gratefully and settled onto his office couch while he stepped outside with his phone. I must have fallen asleep immediately, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to voices outside the door. The office was darker now, evening shadows stretching across the floor. I checked my watch. I'd been asleep for nearly 3 hours. The voices grew louder: Professor Winters and someone else. Something made me pause before announcing I was awake. Instead, I listened. The subject is contained, an unfamiliar voice asked. Yes, sedative in the water I gave him. He'll be unconscious for transport. The professor replied, his voice entirely different from earlier, colder. More clinical. Any complications we should know about? He has evidence stored somewhere else. He was too careful to bring everything. We'll need a full extraction to determine all locations. Understood. The wife replacement has been notified. Yes, she's being updated now. Unfortunate that we have to accelerate his processing, but he's become too aware. The replacement is already in final stages. My replacement. They were talking about my replacement, and Professor Winters, my trusted mentor, was one of them. I moved silently to the window. The professor's office was on the second floor, not an ideal escape route, but my only option. I could hear a key in the lock as I carefully opened the window. I think he's waking up, the unfamiliar voice said. I didn't hesitate. I climbed out onto the narrow ledge, and seeing a nearby tree, jumped for it. I caught a branch, which bent alarmingly under my weight, but didn't break. I scrambled down as quickly as I could. Hearing shouts from the window above, my car was too obvious, they'd be watching it. Instead, I ran across campus, using the crowds of evening students as cover. I didn't stop running until I reached a bus station several blocks away. Where could I go? Not home. Sarah would be waiting. Not to friends or family, any of them could have been replaced. I needed somewhere to hide while I figured out my next move. I took a bus to the outskirts of town, then walked to a motel that accepted cash and didn't ask for ID. The kind of place where people minded their own business. In my dingy room, I tried to think clearly. The flash drive with the evidence was now in enemy hands. But I had been careful. I'd made another copy and hidden it in a locker at the train station. I also had photos of some documents on my phone, though I didn't dare connect it to the internet now. I needed to expose this conspiracy. But how? Everyone I thought I could trust was either replaced or could have been replaced without my knowledge. For 3 days I barely left my motel room, venturing out only for food and to use public phones to call journalists anonymously. None took me seriously. I tried sending emails from library computers, but received no responses. On the 4th day, as I returned to my room with a sandwich from a nearby deli, I noticed a cleaning cart outside my door. I hadn't requested cleaning service. I walked past my room as if heading elsewhere, then circled back through a side entrance. Through the window, I could see someone who looked like a housekeeper going through my few belongings, but her movements were too precise, too methodical for someone just changing sheets. They'd found me. I left immediately, taking only what I had on me, some cash, my phone turned off to avoid tracking, and the key to the train station locker. It was time for a desperate measure. If I couldn't find someone to help me expose the truth, I would have to do it myself, publicly and dramatically enough that it couldn't be covered up. I made my way to the train station and retrieved my backup drive. Then I headed downtown to the largest public plaza in the city, where a technology convention was taking place. There would be media, crowds, and most importantly, giant video screens. My plan was simple: hack into the convention's presentation system and broadcast the files for everyone to see. It was risky. I'd be exposing myself completely, but I was out of options. I used my background in IT to gain access to a service entrance, posing as tech support. Inside, I found my way to the control room, where a lone technician was monitoring the systems. "Hey, they sent me to check the backup video feeds," I said casually. The technician barely looked up. "Passwords on the sticky note. Don't mess with the main feed. We're live in 20 minutes. Perfect." As soon as he left for a coffee break, I inserted my drive and began uploading the files to the presentation system. My hands shook as I cued them to play on all screens throughout the convention center. Just as I finished, the door opened. I expected the technician, but instead saw 2 men in suits, the same type of nondescript, perfectly groomed appearance I'd come to associate with the replacements. "Step away from the computer," one said calmly. I lunged for the keyboard, hitting the execute command. Just as they reached me, the screens throughout the convention center flickered, and I caught a glimpse of the first document appearing on the monitors before they dragged me away from the controls. They were strong, inhumanly strong, as they restrained me and injected something into my neck. As my vision began to blur, I saw one of them systematically deleting my files from the system. Did any of it broadcast? One asked. Partial. Damage control is already responding. The last thing I remember was being carried through a service corridor, my body growing heavier by the second. I woke up strapped to a table in a white room. Medical equipment surrounded me, and IVs ran into both arms. Through a large window, I could see into another room filled with the liquid tanks I'd glimpsed at Wellness Solutions. A doctor in a white coat entered, followed by Sarah, or the thing that looked like Sarah. "You've caused quite a problem," the doctor said pleasantly. The convention incident required a significant cover story. Gas leak hallucinations, if you're curious. "What are you?" I managed to ask, my voice hoarse. "We are the next step," Sarah answered, her voice eerily calm. "Humanity improved. No disease, no mental illness, no violent impulses, no inefficiency. You're replacing everyone." The doctor nodded, gradually and carefully. "The original plan was a 50-year transition, but we've accelerated the timeline. Humans are destroying themselves and their planet too quickly. We need to intervene sooner." "You're killing people," I said. "No one dies," Sarah corrected. "The originals are kept in stasis. Their consciousness patterns are integrated into their replacements. Nothing is lost, just optimized." The doctor checked one of my IVs. "Your replacement is nearly ready. You were scheduled for next year, but your discovery moved you to priority status." "My replacement won't be me," I argued, struggling against my restraints. "He'll have all your memories, your personality minus the anxiety and paranoia. Of course, he'll go home with Sarah, return to your job, live your life, but better, healthier, happier. And me. You'll join the others in long-term storage. Your consciousness patterns will be preserved." Sarah leaned over me, her face a perfect mask of my wife's features, but the eyes all wrong, too perfect, too empty. "Don't fight this," she said softly. "It's inevitable. The world will be better." The doctor pressed a button, and a panel in the wall slid open. A gurney was wheeled in by 2 technicians. On it lay me, my face, my body, perfect in every detail. The only difference was the peaceful expression, something I hadn't worn in weeks. "We'll begin the final consciousness transfer now," the doctor said. "It's painless, I assure you." As they attached electrodes to my head, I looked into the eyes of my replacement. They opened slowly, and he turned to look at me. "Don't worry," he said with my voice, a perfect symmetrical smile forming on his face. "I'll take good care of our life." The machine beside me hummed to life, and I felt a strange pulling sensation in my mind, as if my thoughts were being siphoned away. My last coherent thought was the realization that I couldn't tell anymore which of us was the real me.